as Craig was alluding to, the Guadalcanal was a slugging match between the United States and the Japanese. Between both, all their combined services were involved: air forces, navies, right up to several carrier battles, battleship engagements,
Hmm.
and supply runs. And it ended with the threat to New Guinea being diminished drastically, which freed up MacArthur's forces
Hmm.
in his South Pacific area. And Admiral Halsey's Southwest Pacific area began to push across the Solomons and into, the New Guinea campaign.
Yeah.
Sorry, the Central Solomons. My bad.
Yeah. So now with that, the Americans had seized the initiative, so they were on the offensive, and the Japanese were firmly on the defensive. At this point, the Allies adopted their strategy, colloquially known as island hopping, and they would, bypass heavily fortified strongholds and seize whichever ones were strategically sound. It's kind of like the idea of taking stepping stones all the way towards the Japanese home islands. And this
And
would
two
be
key strongholds that they bypassed and never really took were Rabaul in near
Mhm.
Australia, and I think you can also, I think they did not take Truck, which was in the Central Pacific, which was all both being massive bases for the Japanese.
Yeah, they just smashed them with endless amounts of raids. This would inevitably culminate in a sustained campaign across the central and the southern Pacific, and this includes, the Marianas, the Carolines, the Palo Islands, and such. And
Might also add this was a political compromise because
yeah,
MacArthur, as we said in our Philippine campaign series, he promised to be back and liberate the Philippines, which is why he wanted the drive to go from New Guinea to the Philippines. And
hmm,
ultimately, the goal was to cut the Japanese home islands in China off from the Dutch East Indies, which
yeah,
is their most important colony
yes,
for the natural resources to fuel their war effort. Whereas Nimitz and the United States Navy wanted a more central approach, which, as you can see on the map shared by Craig, it's going across the various Pacific islands from the Gilberts to the Carolines to the Marshalls and then the Marianas and move towards the home islands, both fulfilling the same goal of cutting off Japan from its resources.
yeah. And one would easily acknowledge, if you were looking at the map that we're looking at right now, it seems obvious that the central path that Nimitz was taking could have been the only path taken. They could have put all their resources into that. Douglas MacArthur, for many reasons, wanted, his second push, we'll say, from the Southwest, and it kind of split resources. And I mean, I think for the people of the Philippines, they are very grateful that it was done the way it was done, and especially for everybody in New Guinea. But again, who knows? If changes have been made, altering history, maybe the war could have ended even sooner if Nimitz got full reign. But we'll never know. So that does bring us closer to the story at hand. The stage is being set for the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Admiral Isaruk Yamamoto, who by this point has been killed by Operation Vengeance. He
He's
had
been dead
kind
a
of,
year.
yeah, he's been dead a year. He instilled like we'll call it a little disease within the Imperial Japanese Navy. It's a mind virus, as Dr. Gadsad would kind of say. Big fan of his, by the way. I go to the school he taught at. And this disease had been going on since the First Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895. So it wasn't exactly Yamamoto who planted the seed. This was kind of pressed into the Japanese military for a very long time. The core belief was quite simple. They sought a decisive battle to just overturn the odds. This would,
It's kind of stemming from the old samurai traditions of completely
yeah,
annihilating your enemy. So fight them where they are the strongest and crush them, which, at least in Yamamoto's mind, it was essential. He gets this decisive victory with crippling losses to the United States so that they would come to the negotiating table
yeah.
to end the war, because Yamamoto was one of the few senior staff members of the Japanese armed forces that knew that they cannot win a long war with the United States.
Yeah, you see, the United States, they have the productive capability that probably trivializes Japan like by 1,000 times, right? But they still need to traverse this large ocean to attack the Japanese. So, in theory, if the Japanese could pull off some miraculous decisive blows against the United States Pacific Fleet, well, this greatly hinders the United States, it delays them, and perhaps if they lose too many resources or men, they might be willing to do a negotiated peace. This was the only hope of the Japanese Empire during the war, and it was basically their only strategy. Now, this was going to be carried on because after Yamamoto, we have, there was someone between, but we're coming up to a point where the person in charge of the Imperial Japanese Navy in June of 1944 is Admiral Toimo Toyoda. And before we go any further, did you want to say a little bit about him, Gareth?
Whoops, was on mute. Just bringing up his image. Great. Why does it? It never comes properly. The
Yeah, I
order in
know.
which I
Every time you put your tabs left to right, I know it's annoying when you're searching.
just give me a moment, but just a small image of Admiral Toyoda because he is now the commander in chief of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Unfortunately, we don't have really great pictures, large quality as we do for the United States admirals. But Toyoda was one of the most senior admirals, even in the build up to World War II, for a country like Japan that was very hierarchical. He was already a full admiral when war broke out, commanding the Japanese IJN Second Fleet by 1938. Now, during when war broke out, he commanded the Kure Naval District, which is one of the large administrative areas commands in the home islands. And from late October or November, early November 1942, he was also on the Supreme War Council. And there he faced again, just as MacArthur hated the United States Navy, the Japanese Navy and Japanese Army hated each other, probably more than the United States at times.
I'd say there's no other force that hated each other more. Yeah.
Yeah. And he wanted to increase the funding and capacity of Japan's industry towards naval aviation, but unsuccessfully, the Supreme War Council was army dominated. And in April 1943, he was actually demoted from the War Council. So, and yeah, that was he was just commanding the Yokosuka Naval District. Now, in the aftermath of the death of Admiral Koga, who died in March of 1944, who was the previous successor to Admiral Yamamoto, Toyoda, through seniority, took over. Uh, Keep in mind, Nagumo was completely disgraced by now, so there was no way in hell the Japanese
Oh
War
yeah.
Council would ever consider him.
Yep.
And learning of the United States plans to invade the Mariana Islands, he activated what was the decisive battle doctrine, and in this case was called Plan AGO, which was the hope of Japan using its carrier forces to strike a decisive blow using aviation against the United States Navy to completely thwart their attack. And he was the one who sanctioned it. And the combined fleet would be gathering in the dusty East Indies and would be sailing east to take on the United States Fifth Fleet under Admiral Spruance.
Okay. Here, I'm going to bring up a new map. Okay, there we go. So, yeah, just like you said, the Japanese were actually taken by surprise by this. They assumed the United States would be targeting something further south, so either the Carolines or the Palau Islands. But the Marianas was actually more strategically sound.